Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the EMS Handoff podcast. This is David Blevins, and along with my co-hosts Bradley Dean and Eric McCullough, we are your source for all things EMS. Tonight we welcome another distinguished guest that is bringing forward a topic that affects services around the country and really around the globe. But we're going to start back with the co-host from the West Coast. Well, not really the West Coast, but close enough. Nashville, West Coast, comparison to us. Social media, web developer, overall educator, Eric McCullough. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm cold. It's really cold here. We didn't get hit with the snow that we were promised, so I'm actually kind of happy about that because I don't get snow days.
So we got snow, and then the snow went away, but it's still cold.
Yeah.
So, in some of the areas around here, we probably had about 1.5 to 2 inches, and it lasted till about lunch, and that was it. So, you can stay over there in Nashville, but a lot of good things going from your side, and we're going to go on over to the other side of me to North Carolina and welcome back the individual is training the next generation of minds over there in North Carolina, Bradley Dean.
Hey, you guys, we had snow last night too. We were out playing in it. We had a new group that we worked on some land navigation and basic search stuff. So we had a little bit of fun out in the snow last night too.
Gotta love some land navigation. And I always seem to find that we always did the training in the middle of land navigation in like this weather, 20 degrees. Let's go outside and have some fun with our map and compass.
Wait a minute, is Air Force?
Right. Yes. Yes. Not all of Air Force. I will tell you that. Not all of Air Force, but when you had to trace chemical deposition and stuff, you had to know what maps look like and how to operate it. It was yes. Thanks for that, Army. Just stay over there. We'll bring our A-10s in and help you out when you get yourself in trouble again.
We appreciate it.
All right. Before we introduce our guest this evening, we'd like to thank our podcast partner, the Journal of Emergency Medical Services. They've been a tremendous partner in helping the EMS podcast get off the ground and come to you all every week. While the EMS Handoff serves as your source for all things the EMS and the podcast verse, Jim's has been an industry leader in the profession for many years. Go by the website and check out and support their efforts in keeping the industry informed. And also to check out our fellow Jim's podcast host. Jim's has also recently expanded their podcast platform to include Spotify. So make sure and go by Spotify and look for EMS Today by Jim's for the EMS Handoff podcast. Additionally, as we started to talk about last week, we'd like to introduce you to our EMS Handoff official merchandise partner, Pursue Outfitters. The EMS Handoff podcast is partnered with Pursue Outfitters to offer a line of comfortable and stylish EMS Handoff gear with t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, and hoodies for your wear. We'd love to see pictures on our social media that Eric's been putting together within your EMS Handoff merchandise. Go by pursueoutfitters.com/EMS Handoff to find your t-shirt, long sleeve shirt, or hoodie in the color of your choice. And with all that out of the way, Bradley, it's time to get started on our topic for this week. So why don't we go ahead and introduce our listeners to this week's guest?
Well, tonight we're going to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. So today we're joined by Captain Kirk. Kirk Mittelman is a 40-year veteran of EMS and Public Safety. He retired in 2001 from Provo City Police after 22 years and a Purple Heart. After retiring from law enforcement, he went to work full-time in fire and EMS, where he again retired after serving as a paramedic captain and EMS coordinator for Eagle Mountain Fire Department. Captain Kirk is currently working for Reach Air Medical, serving Contra Costa County Fire Protection District as the Clinical Quality Improvement and Clinical Education Coordinator. He teaches all levels of EMT and wilderness medicine as a co-founder and program director of Mount Nebo Training Center. In his spare time, he loves to travel to third world countries as a volunteer to teach EMS providers, physicians, nurses, and when things get a little too hectic, Papa Kirk can be found water skiing and enjoying the sun at Lake Powell with his 4 children and their spouses, 14 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, and I think there are more on the way. Kirk?
There are. There's actually 4 great-grandchildren now.
Oh, my.
2 of them were just at the house today. Well, thank you for the welcome. You guys had talked about snow earlier, and I am in the greatest snow on earth state, Utah. And unfortunately, we haven't had enough snow this year. My yard's pretty barren, so we're hoping for more.
Well, we sit over here in East Tennessee, just casually getting some every now and again, and every little dusting closes schools down for the next week. So we just got to wait and see. It's all completely melted, and we'll have to see what they call and tell us first thing in the morning. So welcome to the show, Kirk. The next hour we're going to be going over a very important topic for the profession, and one that is kind of mirrored really the community, but it has affected so many people. So as you can tell by the title of this episode, as you're coming on, talking about the addiction among us. So why don't you, I'll give you the opportunity to kind of introduce the topic to us, and let us know why this is a passion of yours, and what's going on.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate the offer to come on and talk about this. It's a topic obviously near and dear to my heart, as well as many people out there that are listening. Generally speaking, there's not one of us that hasn't ran into a friend, a family member who's been taken by addiction, with opioids being on a huge rise and their abuse. EMS professionals, fire, police, we're not any different than the general public, other than we have a higher addiction rate than the general public does because of our personalities. There's not one of us that's not a type A. I have a very personal story that's affected my family, led to some terrible outcomes, and I've had another one that's led to some very good outcomes, friends in the service. And that's why I enjoy going around and speaking about this. Addiction kills 200,000 people a year in the United States. And if you think about it, 32% of all emergency room visits are from this as well. So that's why I like to talk about it, and that's why I bring it up for you.
So this is something, as Bradley mentioned, you've got a long-standing history, not only from the EMS on the air and ground side, but also in law enforcement as well. So you've had an extensive history that's kind of really spanned, and I think he said over 40 years currently. So you've kind of been able to see this as it's really kind of morphed into what we have in the environment today, right?
Yeah, in the last 40 years, the drugs that we're abusing have come and gone, and we're back to heroin, we're back to opioids again. We were into meth for quite a while as a country, and now it's gone back to some of those more early drugs that I saw. And I've seen people all over public safety that have been affected by it. And unfortunately, it's taken a lot of lives as well over the years.
So this is something that we see on a regular basis on the units across the country. I know here in our area, different times of the year now, it's really kind of changed because of so much focus has been placed on COVID. But at one point in time, there was basically a daily count on the news stations every morning of overdose that had been treated that month and how many individuals died of overdose. So let's get into this. It's something that we see, and when we see the negative effects so much, why is it that we turn around and see such a high prevalence of addiction within the public safety community?
I want you to place yourself in the cockpit of a fighter jet, or possibly a NASCAR driver. You guys are from the NASCAR capital of the world out there in North Carolina. We're NASCAR nuts at our house. And go Chase. He won last year's championship. I'll just throw that in. He's a good old boy. But I want you to place yourself in that cockpit, that car, and think how driven those guys are. Tom Brady, as a football player, Joe Montana, those people are highly driven. EMS, fire, police, public safety people are that highly driven. They're type A personalities, and we are addictive. We are addicted to EMS. We're addicted to the adrenaline that comes with running those calls. And for that reason, our personalities lend itself well to becoming addicted to drugs, alcohol. And on top of that, we're in a high stress environment. So we're constantly looking for ways to increase our thrill level. And part of that comes with, unfortunately, with the use of drugs and alcohol, that risk taking.
So, we're actually recording this during the second half of the Super Bowl. So when it comes out in 2 weeks, we'll know the outcome there, whether it's Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady. But we take a look, and it's something I think all of us can probably say. I know I have a few times that a lot of individuals kind of come in to the profession thinking that everything is lights and sirens and is, going 95 miles an hour to save, babies from burning buildings and such like that. But that's kind of that mentality. We draw those individuals, and I think in your presentation, it basically said, they're driven, we're risk takers, because, we do, again, go out in those unsure environments like today, the snow, in the South, we don't have a lot of stuff to pre-treat and treat the roads and plow as needed. So we go out and go fast and go to environments that need to happen, but yet that's not all the time. So we have this kind of pent up energy, and then we find other ways to use as an outlet.
Absolutely. You show me a cop that doesn't speed off duty in his own car. You show me a fireman that doesn't do the same thing, an EMS person. We like to drive fast. We like to ride hard. We play hard. And for that reason, again, that personality just comes out in us.
You think it's primarily that personality, though, and I'm taking this more from the perspective of people coming into EMS. We can all say when we're younger, which is where most people enter the service, you have this huge threshold of adrenaline, energy, and all that stuff. Maybe it's that depletion over the years, or maybe the expectation doesn't get met, the life changes occur. And so that adrenaline rush that used to give you those highs start not being as balanced as, the fact that you now have a family to support, money becomes an issue. So all of a sudden there are factors there that you didn't have before, and you got that vacuum that occurs.
Well, absolutely. And part of the problem that we see is that vacuum is there. Plus, there's not a lot of people that get those really cool calls. We lose a lot of personnel because they don't get enough of the calls, lights and siren going all the time, and that sort of thing. And so that does add to it. And then you've got all those extra stressors that are involved in your lives, from money and kids and new homes and needing to do better and try to live better than our parents did. And those stresses come in, and money becomes an issue. The divorce rate amongst public safety workers is high. And again, that lends to this as well. So all these things can factor in. I think I will tell you that the older I've gotten, I don't drive any slower, though. I'm still wanting to be on the NASCAR track.
So let's get into a little bit about the actual move towards addiction within the profession itself. So what are some of the common causes that we see as far as why individuals within this profession start to get into, maybe starting off with the ones that they commonly call gateway drugs, the excessive use of alcohol, or then going into the softer side of drugs, into the more hardcore side?
Well, when people first get into narcotic use or drug use, abuse, they don't really think this is going to be a problem for them. A lot of times we think we can control it, and so we try it, maybe just as you're at a party somewhere, they get into it a little bit, and then over time, it becomes something that we think we can control. We try it a little bit more. Some people that get into this profession come to us with the problem to begin with. We just don't detect it because they have it, quote unquote, under control. That first onset, when you get that first job, you start to make a little bit of extra money. You see it as a gateway out of the problems that you're seeing. Everybody that listens to this podcast knows that our profession is stressful. It's not just that risk taker attitude. It's the stresses, the death that we see, the dismemberments that we see, the hardships. We don't go into people's days when they're at their best. And some people need to find outs to get away from that. And sometimes we find that out as being drugs and alcohol.
So we also see, one of the episodes we had just about a month ago, we actually talked about kind of the mental health aspect of this job as well. So we talked about the wartime soldiers and everybody going overseas, and they start to see a lot of that death and dismemberment of friends through IEDs or other attacks. And they come back and try to mask that through use of alcohol or drugs. We're seeing that on this side as well. You kind of mentioned it. It's their escape to get away from some of this stuff. So they'll start in. This is where, when they start into those, this is where we kind of get into that tolerance versus, and then addiction as well. So let's go ahead and go into those two terms real quick. What does it mean when we're talking about a tolerance here? And then what is addiction itself?
So anytime we're tolerant, I want you to think about that house for tolerance, where they've got 5 kids and they're all under 10 years of age. And you're the guest over there, you've never had a child, and you get over there and you're like, man, this house is super loud. Now, I won't say that this is one of my son's houses, but it is. And every time I show up there, he owns 6 of these grandchildren that we've got. And he's got 3 of them are fairly young, but the volume in his house is way high. And we always ask him, how do you put up with that noise? And he goes, what noise? So I want you to think about drug abuse that same way. When you start taking a little bit of drugs, a little bit of alcohol, you build up that tolerance. And it's like, I took a drug? Really? I wouldn't know. I'm functioning fine. Addiction is just overwhelming desire. You've got to have it. You need it every single day. It's really running your life rather than you running it. And that's where the problems really come in.
So 2 things here. One of them, I've always heard that an individual that gets high consecutively, they're always chasing that they had the first time. The body never reacts the same way. It's that tolerance. It starts on that very first use. So they take that, they have that response, and they're always looking for that response afterwards. And the body's already started to build up that tolerance. So you need a little bit more. You need a little bit more. Now, one of the things I want to get into based on that itself is, as we talk about some of these jobs that we're doing out there, some of the ones that are maybe the lights and sirens, the emergency calls, but even just the normal transports, we have a lot of individuals that through their work, they may not be maintaining good posture and such when we're moving patients. And so we have a lot of individuals that have suffered back injuries or other injuries in which they end up going to the physician prescribes pain medications, and they have to keep working to make that money. So they, hey, I'll just take one, I'll take another one. And then all of a sudden they're to that point, as you said, the overwhelming desire that now has changed from that masking the pain to they have to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are susceptible to injuries. We're no different other than people don't realize what it's like to lift a 350-pound patient off of their bed onto a stretcher when that 350-pound person can't move. And you show me an old EMT or paramedic, and I'll show you somebody with a bad back. Unfortunately, we do go in, we see the doctor. It's getting better now as far as the prescriptions getting given to us as readily, but they're still out there. We see professional football players go through this with, for instance, Brett Favre. And I hated him while he played because he played against my 49ers, but nonetheless, he's a great football player. but he got hooked on Vicodins. And football players, EMS people, we're very susceptible to getting hooked on them because we do have to continue to work and we got to continue to put out a product for the public. They expect us to be at our very best, and some of us hide that with the drugs and that sort of thing.
So from this perspective then, let's go ahead and get into some of the pathophysiology side. I know Bradley's got some that he wants to discuss here as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think that people need to understand, there's a whole pathophysiological and psychological aspect to the pathway of addiction, and we've kind of hit on that. You mentioned alcohol, and so alcohol increases the activity of the dopamine neuron. So once we start running these calls and we get that high, we enjoy what we're doing, we're helping somebody, and all of a sudden we're not getting those calls. That's what we got into this for. Somebody who, either is already predisposed to issues with alcohol or addiction, or someone that's predisposed to addiction with other things. And I'm not talking about the person that has the occasional, beer with their meal or wine or whatever, although that can certainly lead into something else. Alcohol increases the activity of the dopamine receptors, where those neurons in the mesolimbic, reward pathway make us feel good. It's a pleasurable feeling that's replacing the void or that vacuum that we're talking about, and that's where we get that euphoria. And the whole other piece of that with opiate receptor sites, they release endorphins, something known as enkephalins, which I won't dive into all of that, but the whole part of that is if we're stressed, we have issues with finances and everything else. Well, now we have that vagal tone change and the upset stomach, the nausea, not feeling well. And if they try an opiate or a synthetic opiate, what that does is that actually works with that vagus system and slows down the GI tract, makes them feel better. So that the pain is gone. And I don't think people really understand that the vagus nerve, when it comes down, it wraps all the way through everywhere that our stomach and our GI tract is. So when they have that, the pain goes away. And it's a real physical and psychological pain that these individuals are feeling. So I think that's the pathway to addiction. We just got to figure out, when somebody gets on that pathway, how do we help them?
So let's go ahead and really kind of talk about that pathway then. So one of the biggest things is we don't tend to find out, or we may not actually admit that there's something going on until it's too late and something has come up that's gotten us in trouble. So we take a look, and all of a sudden either a random drug test comes about, or that individual is driving an apparatus and all of a sudden they bump something which requires a response by the organization. And now all of a sudden we see this and we really start to boil down. But Kirk, as we're talking about this, there's some signs and symptoms of the addiction that we can take a look at even within the just in our own house. So when we're there with our crews, we can take a look, right?
Oh, absolutely. As you look back, and most of us don't realize it when it's actually coming down, but if you look backwards, you think, wow, I really did see some of these problems. Possibly they've got some money issues that are coming up. Maybe they're short. They keep borrowing money from you. You probably never see it again, but they borrow money from you. They start to blame other people for their mistakes, what's going on. Maybe they start missing a bunch of work days. Things are piling up. They're borrowing sick time from you. Bradley just mentioned those GI disturbances. Their GI system's constantly in a flux. I can think back to driving along with an ex-son-in-law, and we're driving along, and he had to stop about every 45 minutes to use the bathroom. Turns out, surprise, surprise, he had a big drug problem. Just that one little thing. He had a lot of other signs and symptoms that go with that, but that was one of those that were like, oh man, I wish he could fix this. And maybe you've got some money missing. When it comes to family, things come up missing in the household. That's because they pawned them to buy their drugs. They borrowed money out of your wallet without you knowing. In other words, they're stealing stuff. The big changes, change in how they look and just how they act overall. Something is now off.
So as a partner, so we're, Kirk and I, we're working on the ambulance together, and, we should be communicating with our partner. Now, that's not going to be the conversation every day, but in the back of our mind, we're not necessarily looking for this, but if you truthfully care about your partner, you'll start to take a look at some of these things and say, hey, something's not adding up, because, as you mentioned, a lot of this stuff, you mentioned family. However, we're living in the same place for a 24-hour period, 10 days a month. And so some of that may be noticeable there as well. So again, you see they don't show up to work, or you start to see some of those things missing, but it could just be in that conversation. You get some people that get angry quicker than they used to. Their attention's not where it was. Then you can get into some of the actual physiologic changes within the body, where we're talking about the sizes of pupils, their speech, their alertness. They're normally up and about, and yet they're falling asleep all of the time. And so if we were paying attention to some of those, we could say, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, I throw this out that it's not the same old David, the same old Brad, the same old Eric, the same old Kirk that we're used to hanging around with. It's that person that we don't recognize all of a sudden. Literally, I had one of my staff fall asleep at the whiteboard teaching a class. That's abnormal for them. And when that happens, there's something going on. Doesn't necessarily have to be a drug problem, but that's time for us to reach out and talk to them, find out what's going on. Where is their head? Where is their life?
I think there's a lot of overlap too when identifying someone who's having these addiction problems with like a part of the suicidal awareness training that's been both in the military and in pre-hospital professions and fire and police and all that stuff. We go through the training. In fact, it's ironic. We'll sit through the same training and identify this stuff, and then we look back and we wait till it's 2020 when there's a problem. And then we're like, oh, well, now we see all the symptoms and stuff, because like as a provider, you see the symptoms too. You don't need to WebMD it. You know how to hide stuff a lot easier. So I would argue that the signs of addiction from our own colleagues and peers are going to be way more subtle than people who don't know and are not educated into what they're supposed to look like. So it is going to take, I think, a little bit more intuitiveness and more being more approachable about what's really going on with them, and see if there are changes in their behaviors.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I can tell you there's been a change in culture too. We used to hang around with each other off shift. And I don't know what it's like for you guys, but the younger kids coming up, they don't tend to go motocross riding, mountain biking, all as a group anymore from that shift. So it's harder to note those changes in their private lives. We used to do a lot together, and we'd see these changes off duty with their family. And I really miss those times with some of the crews that I had back in the day.
So let's take a look at the operational side of this. So obviously, anytime that somebody's impaired, if they're getting behind the wheel or involved with patient care, it can be rather significant. It has the undue effect of putting somebody else's life in harm.
Yeah, it does. And we can look at case history after case history. Again, I've had friends that have gone through this, and I had one that was driving under the influence in an ambulance, and another who was working on shift with an addiction to meth. What it does, it changes our judgment. If you're not able to make that judgment that you have a problem, it's really hard to be judging which drugs to give on shift. What is the right treatment path for these patients? I'm happy to share some personal stories, you guys, that if that would help, you think, to make some light of this whole, put some light on the whole thing. But generally speaking, our decision making out in the field is not the same if we're under the influence of anything other than focused right on our job.
So, taking a look at this, we're going to go into the regulatory side and have a conversation there for just a little bit, because I do believe that this has a dramatic impact on individuals desiring to seek help. And I'll speak to ours as well, but I want to open it up to you first, Kirk, and the fact that what have you seen as far as the normal response to addictions in this profession when it comes to being caught, whether it's through your, drug testing and being managed regulatory wise?
Right. So from the regulatory side, I have seen every different response, which is really unfortunate. One agency we had a guy with a opioid problem. We all knew he had an opioid problem. Finally, the administration caught him on a drug test. And unfortunately, the employee said, yeah, or I should say, fortunately, he said, yes, I have a problem. And so they took him under their wing. They took him in, put him into drug rehab. He was given a second chance with that. He was one of our engineers on the fire truck as well. And so that put all of us at risk when he was operating under the influence like that. And we were glad to see that he got a second chance. The problem sometimes is we try to make the regulatory side black and white. A friend of mine that had a terrible alcohol addiction, how they didn't see it, I don't know. But he's the one that they caught driving under the influence in the ambulance. From the regulatory side, many lost his EMT for, I believe it was a 4-year suspension. He chose never to get it back again. And we lost somebody who was a great care provider because of the addiction. He never got a chance to come back. Stealing drugs off of the engines, the ambulances. Unfortunately, I had an incident, and I won't tell you what city, Provo, where this happened. It's been long enough ago. But the guy was the EMS chief, and he was getting into the drug packs. And most of you guys now have a hard-sided case for your narcs, right? For the scheduled drugs, they go into a hard case. Yeah, there's a reason for that. This guy had figured out how to go through that nylon sack, that ripstop nylon bag, and he would suck out the morphine out of the vial, replace it with saline. Now you'd think, man, somebody must have noticed him getting high, coming to work. He did a really good job of maintaining until it was a police officer in my city that got involved in a car wreck, had some fractures. The cops, the officer was in a lot of pain. The paramedics gave him some pain meds. Well, it was in one of these nylon sacks that they pulled out the morphine out of, gave it to him, and he's like, I don't know what y'all are giving me, but this thing don't help a bit. They gave him another dose. They opened up another vial, nothing. And that's when they caught him and they put him on tape. And he ended up doing time in prison for it. It was taken, he'll never get his EMT back, but he lost his job with us through the fire service. He lost it as an RN at the hospital. And just very unfortunate what can happen from this kind of stuff. And we take two varying sides.
Well, and that's, we've seen that. And, I think when we talk here, we talk a really fine line, because again, out there, we are highly trusted by the public to come in their most intimate time of need. They're hurt or they're sick and they need help, and they expect somebody to come that is capable of taking care of them and kind of going back to the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And we know with those drugs that it can be very difficult. But as we take a look at some of this, some of them being, that innocuous side where they've been hurt, they take medication, they stay until they get addicted. So we have to balance that from the regulatory side of, does this person need help, or does this person need some sort of civil, criminal, or judicial regulatory punishment? And so when we take a look at this, we take a look at some of the other professions, and you can take a look at the American College of Emergency Physicians, and they have a physician impairment policy in which you can take a look that if they do seek out that help, then they take themselves out of that clinical role, they go get help that's needed, and they come back without any adverse actions. But they have that kind of in that policy statement first, that basically opens up that avenue that says you have the ability to say, I'm in trouble, I need help, and I'm not going to have those adverse actions. As you mentioned, if an individual in our profession says, I'm in trouble, I need help, do they fall on the side that they get that second chance, or do they fall on the side that they have a probation or suspended license, or even worse, and then they end up in a spot where now their license, which was their livelihood, goes away, they quit making money, and it makes things worse. So do you believe that if we had a more open kind of along that ACEP policy statement, that we would have more individuals come forward earlier to say, hey, I need help, I'm in trouble?
I have to believe the answer is yes to that. I have to believe that we're smart enough as a profession that if we need help, and we know that maybe you won't get promoted, but if that's the worst thing that's going to happen to me, if I open up and say I've got an addiction problem, whether it be to alcohol, drugs, or any other problem, if I come forward and I ask for the help, that it will turn their life around and keep them in the profession. I hearken back to a narcotics officer I used to work with, and he was a great narcotics officer, but he fell into an addiction, and the team tried to save him. I worked for the police department there in Provo for a long time, and I worked for a chief for many of those years that believed in second chances. And if you just came in and said, I have a problem, he would pay for the rehab himself if the city wouldn't. That's the kind of attitude that we could benefit from. Unfortunately, in Mike's case, he didn't heed the advice of his team, and it went the other way. But had he done it, we used to joke that with the chief, the only thing you couldn't get away with was murder. If you did anything else and went in and said, I did it, he'd go, all right, well, we don't want you to ever do it again. And you may get a week on the beach, you may get a demotion from your stripes, whatever it was that you had. But by gosh, he was a firm believer in second chances, and he cared for his personnel. The men and women of our department were well respected, and we respected him in return.
So this kind of what you just said there reminds me kind of the mentality started with the clearance that I maintain out of the base due to my position there. At one point in time, the fear was if anything were to come up mental health wise, and you were found to be seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist, if there was any drugs, or if there was any of these, I think there's 14 different indicators that they look at. If they ever found that you were involved in drugs, excessive alcohol use, or you're seeing a psychiatrist or psychologist, they would pull back your security clearance because you're no longer, you weren't trustworthy. But at the same time that was going on, you had commanders, kind of like you were talking about there. It's like, hey, if you're having a problem, come see me, because I'd much rather help you out of this now than that. And so it was kind of that balance between, well, I know my commander says I can come talk to him if there's a problem, but I also know that if this stuff happens, I lose my position, or I lose my clearance, and so you're really walking a tightrope.
Absolutely. And it's got to be an environment where you are free to self-report. That ability to self-report, let's take it away from a drug addiction. If you make a mistake on a call, shouldn't you have the ability to come in and say, I made a mistake. I gave too much of the medication. I didn't follow a protocol or a guideline. And for that, I realize I need to be retrained or I need some help, but you shouldn't lose your job over it. You shouldn't lose your certification over that. And so that open door policy and that trust back and forth is imperative to us, I think. Out in the field, you've got to have no fear of somebody looking over your shoulder all the time that if you do something wrong and you self-report, you're going to lose it. So, yeah.
Well, that goes back to, we've kind of talked about it some here, and I know we have some coming up, but talking about like QA doesn't need to be a punitive action. It needs to be a place to learn and grow. I want to read one thing out of the American College of Emergency Physicians policy statement, which I find really kind of interesting. It says, existence of a health problem in a physician is not synonymous with occupational impairment. Because of their training and dedication, most physicians with appropriately managed personal health problems and other stressors are able to function safely and effectively in the workplace. Physician impairment, on the other hand, exists when a physician becomes unable to practice medicine with reasonable skill and safety because of personal health problems or other stressors. In most physicians, impairment is a self-limiting state that is amenable to intervention, assistance, recovery, and or resolution. So I liked that line. In fact, I highlighted that last part, that it's amenable to intervention, assistance, recovery, and or resolution. And that most of our individuals, if we took a look at it, we found that we created an open policy. They could come, we had other people that were looking out for, we could identify these things early on, get the help that they need. They're amenable to that intervention and recovery because they want to keep going. They love this job. They're putting in and day out. Like I said, those that have back injuries or stuff, they're looking to still come in and do the job. And yet, if we don't catch it, if they can't self-report without the fear of significant repercussions, then the only option they have is to lose their license.
Yeah, and from the QA side, the term I learned was culture of safety. And that culture of safety means that if you can provide for some help in an open environment and we are accepting of each other and our problems and our misgivings, we're going to build a better program overall and a better profession.
So with that, what are a couple of resources that are available for workers or even students? So it's not only our practitioners that are in the field. We see those especially that are going through on the higher levels of advanced and the paramedical level side and education with those additional stressors that may get caught into this as well. So what are some resources that are available to help them if a situation does occur?
Well, I'm going to tell you that our first and foremost resource, that's the folks that are listening to this podcast and the four of us. We're a great resource because we've got open ears and we're able to help. Once you're able to talk to somebody else and let them know you've got a problem, that's your first step. The next resource that's out there, and there's many within your communities, but I'm a firm believer in AA, NA, or Alcoholics Anonymous, the Narcotics Anonymous. The 12-step program that they've got has been very helpful within my own family with an addict. I can tell you some real special things have happened from that. There's church plans out there. I know I live in Utah, which it'll surprise a lot of you. The LDS faith is real strong here, but they have a great addiction recovery plan here. So it's plans like that through your church, through the organization. And then each organization, and a lot of people don't make use of this, but every organization, every agency has an EAP plan, employee assistance plan. Those are no charge to people. And they're really helpful. There used to be a big stigma, like you said, if I go and ask for help, I'm now looked at as an outcast. And that shouldn't be the case. And I don't think it is as much today as it was when I started in 1980. I know some of the people listening weren't even born in 1980, but these programs weren't around back then in those dark ages. You had to suck it up, buttercup, and that's not the case anymore. As a friend and a family member who's had addicts around them, reach out, talk to them, and be there as a resource.
That's one thing that we talk a lot about in our classroom, and I at my institution, I've got a really huge advocate for some of the things we've talked about, and it's actually been on this podcast. I referenced it earlier, but he's through the mental health situations that he's been in, he's become one that a lot of people have clung to. But one of the things that we talk about is, there's not a single person in this profession that is able to do the job by themselves. I use an example. If you're able to drive the ambulance at the same time you're doing CPR, please let me know, because you're evidently doing something right. But we're not. This is a team, and teamwork is one of those things that sometimes it's just that of being able to talk to your partner and seeing that, hey, that individual, Kirk, that's normally up kind of singing with the songs in between calls, is, falling, not even able to walk without falling asleep. You say, hey man, what's going on? And open that conversation.
So I want to jump in and we've talked about a couple of the resources, but part of the reason some of these individuals don't go after those resources is the stigma of addiction that we've got within our community. And we've got to break the stigma of addiction, not just with our patients that we deal with that have addiction, but within our community and our personnel. And if we can get around that stigma, and there's a great video that's out there, I'll plug this for Ray Kemp, but Not My Addiction is a wonderful video for you to use in a classroom or an agency that talks about the whole stigma. And then moving beyond that, I think there has to be a balance between the clinical aspect, the administrative aspect, and the regulatory aspect. So when we look at the clinical side of it, we've got to take care of our people because they have a problem when we identify this. Moving to the administrative piece of this and the regulatory piece, if we just fire them and get rid of them, then, well, now they no longer have access to EAP. We now have the issue of they no longer have insurance to be able to get into a program, and most of them can't afford it based off of their salary and their savings. And we understand how our personnel get wrapped up into financial things and don't have the money. We've already talked about that with the addiction piece of this. So if we just get rid of them and not give them a pathway or that second chance that Captain Kirk mentioned, then all we've done is we've pushed them further into their addiction and ruined their livelihood, their family, and everything else. So if somehow we can build this impaired provider program to some type of self-sustainment within our profession, maybe we can feed people into it a little bit easier and come out healthy on the other side.
We have to take a look at it too, Bradley, that we can't just fire everybody, because right now we've got a shortage of individuals that are working in the profession. So if we do end up getting rid of somebody, then the responders that are left are hit with that much greater of a workload and can potentially place them in the same boat as well. Again, through repetitive stress injuries to the body, repetitive stress injuries to the mind as well, in which they do seek out, as we've talked about, some of the relief, either from pain, physical pain or mental pain as well. And then that just turns around and makes the process even worse.
Yeah, if I can add just a little bit, there's more success stories out there for addicts who've turned it around. I see one who's an EMS chief now that had an addiction problem. There's another one that works for another agency that I know very, very well, was given a second chance in another county and is now a captain leading a crew. And he's more aware of needing to care and listen. Don't think that a 30-day program alone is going to turn somebody around, though. That's my reminder to everybody. It takes a village, which is our entire crew, our community in EMS, to solve this problem and to help somebody. So if you're embarrassed by the fact that you have an addiction, please come forward and know that there's people out here that do care enough And I think that stigma needs to go away within the service itself. Hang on to these people because they are good people.
Well, and to think about this, and I think because we have seen so many people in the field that we go to day in and day out that are continuing to overdose or expand their experimentation. Not all individuals that have ever taken drugs are recidivists. There are times where they go through their process, they get clean, and that's it. They realize kind of the error. So continuing that stigma is not only is addiction, addiction bad people, whatnot. We also have to say is they do have the chance to recover. They do have a chance to be very highly productive individuals. They do have a chance to make a difference in their own life and the lives of others.
I terribly agree with that. Yes, or hugely agree, not terribly. I totally agree from a huge standpoint. Again, I've seen more success than heartache if we listen and we are there for people. I interrupted you, Bradley.
No, I was just going to say, and the other thing we have to understand, and I think David was alluding to this, is recovery is not a destination; it's a continual process. So
Yeah,
that's totally agreed.
So as we take a look at this, this podcast is one, and we've already kind of talked about some of the stuff that is already jumping off, if you want to say, from this conversation itself. But we also have to take a look from anybody that's listening to the podcast or tied to the group that we have here and say, hey, guys, it all starts with each one of you. Addiction, we understand the implications behind it, but we know that each one of these people, they're family. And this is a time where we need to act like a family. So make sure to take a look at your partner. Make sure to take a look at the other crews and see what's going on, and just reach out. It's like, hey, Kirk, I know you had a bad call. Let's talk about it for just a minute. How are you doing? And so we may not go down that pathway. It maybe talking to your regulatory agencies and said, hey, we've watched what has happened the last 6 months, year, 5 years, and we've seen for lack of a better term, the kind of criminalization on this side. Like, let's take a look at ways that we can change this. Go to the physician's policy about let's getting help. Let's open doors. And it starts from everybody that's here listening right now to go out and make these relationships work and help our partners out in the field.
Yeah, you won't find any argument for me to have a more open and loving environment. If there's somebody out there listening to this right now and you're trying to hide your addiction, trust me, you're not hiding it. You've got to turn it around. Take a look at your family and how much they mean to you and get that thing turned around. I've got a picture up of an addict with his family sitting next to him right now. And all I can think about is how great it is that he turned his life around and has really moved down the road to recovery and staying recovered. And I'm proud as hell of him.
So, Kirk, this is obviously just the tip of an iceberg. There is so much more about this topic. If you would just kind of wrap up and give us your final thoughts, and then if you would let our listeners know how they could reach out to you as well.
Sure. So again, if we can change the stigma, we can change our outlook. I think we can do great things within our profession. There's nothing we can't do without a team around us. Again, to the addicts that are out there, the people that are addicted right now to something, reach out to a friend, to a family member without fear of reprisal. The next thing is if you know somebody, you've got to reach in and talk to them, grab a hold of them and say, I know what's going on. Let's get you some help. If people really need that help, reaching out to a friend, a family member, NA, AA, get into a program as fast as you can. There's many, many good programs that are out there. Addict to Athlete, you can reach out, look at them on Facebook. I know Blue will help you there. And then to reach me, I'm pretty easy to find. You can go to the Mountain Nebo Training Facebook page. You can just reach out to me by phone number. And if you don't have my phone number, just look me up in your local phone book. I'm listed right there under I Care. But if they want to jot it down, it's 801-372-0928. My phone is on 24/7. And if somebody needs some help, please call me. And again, it's 801-372-0928. I may not live near you, but I do have ears. And the good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Very true. And it's also one of those things that this community is still relatively small, so you may not be right next to you as far as the distance, but we all know people, and we can make a phone call and just say, hey, you got somebody in your area that needs a little bit of help. So definitely glad to have you on. I'm going to give Bradley and Eric both a chance to just kind of wrap up their thoughts as well. And so, Eric, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So my thing would be the big takeaway is you can't overcome your addiction. You can try, you will not overcome it. You got to have help. We don't like to do that because it's not part of our culture. We're bootstrap people, and for the most part, we're Americans that are used to being gritty and determinate. This is the one part where you just have to humble yourself and realize you need help. We've all had to use some sort of help at some point. So this is a good opportunity to leverage that for your abilities, for you and your family.
Bradley?
So one of the things I will say is I think we need more programs for credentialed EMS personnel. It seems that a lot of places have rules, they have laws, they have regulations, but very few have a program or a way to actually help someone. So for those that are EMS administrators, regulators, please take a look at what you've got and let's build the program, or at least educate people how to access that program if you've got one.
All right. Well, thank you for another great episode. I know that we all appreciate Kirk for coming on and being here with us today. With the opening of our website that Eric has put together for us at EMS or at emshandoff.com, you can also reach each one of us by our first and last name at emshandoff.com. So like mine would be David Blevins at EMS Handoff. And you can reach Bradley and Eric the same way as well. And so we always like to end the same way as we conclude. I'd like to always thank each one of you and let you know that we look forward to recording these episodes and engaging with each one of you on these topics. However, without your feedback, we don't know what you're thinking. So please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform now, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. Just look up the EMS Today by Gems on any of those locations. Again, you can find us at emshandoff.com. All of our information. We also have the Instagram and Facebook group. A lot of activity going on here recently. And don't forget where you can find your nice little EMS Handoff swag at pursuitoutfitters.com. So take care, stay safe, do great things, and always remember the value of your EMS Handoff.